Resident Evil 3. It launched hot off the heels of Resident Evil 2, the latter of which was received well by fans and critics. Resident Evil 3, on the other hand, received lukewarm reviews by reviewers and critics, while older fans of the series were very disappointed with the game. Myself, I thought the Resident Evil 2 remake was a lot of fun and a solid game. I wanted the Resident Evil 3 remake to be great too, and granted I was not as mega hyped as some of the others for this game, as personally I always liked the original Resident Evil 2 just a tiny bit better than Resident Evil 3, but I was still a little hyped, don't get me wrong. And I really didn't expect it to be as good as the Resident Evil 2 remake. However, I most certainly didn't expect Resident Evil 3 to be full of fundamentally poor design and gameplay choices, and a lot of those choices were consciously made by the developers. And first off, I want to say, there seems to be a lot of misconceptions and incorrect information around the development of Resident Evil 3. The first misconception that I frequently see in videos and read from commenters is that the game was rushed after only 1 year of development time, and many seem to believe that since Resident Evil 3 was released just 1 year after Resident Evil 2, that the game must have been rushed as fast as possible within that time frame. However, this is not the case at all. The game took 3 years to make and was developed alongside Resident Evil 2 with a completely separate team. This was confirmed by Peter Fabiano. Here is the quote. Sources will be in the description. The game, however, most certainly did need additional development time. And you will see that as I will demonstrate shortly. But I think the misinformation about the game being developed in just 1 year is spread around so often because it's actually almost believable. And it's made believable by things like the reused assets from Resident Evil 2, the reused enemy models, and a lot of areas it definitely plays like a game that was only developed in 1 year. However, I would argue that with even more development time, the game probably still would have been a flop. The whole game has consistently poor design choices on the most basic levels, and at times, these design choices are so bad that they are borderline insulting to the player. Sure, more time might have made the game longer, but if it kept most design aspects, it still would have sucked. I mean, the whole game would have had to be scrapped and redesigned from the ground up to save it. Most reviewers seem to single out a few things as a sole reason for the game's lackluster reception. These include rushed development time, which often leads to complaints about the overall length of the game. Other main complaints include the amount of cutscenes, the downsized overall city map, the downsized story, the weird camera angles, the way Nemesis is introduced and handled throughout the game. Additionally, many are disappointed in the game's change to a more action-based game over a horror focus, and while I agree with most of these points, however, I don't think that these issues are actually the core problems of the game. None of those are inherently bad. Like in almost every situation in this game, there's often deliberately poor design choices. The introduction and first sequence of events of Resident Evil 3 is talked about a lot on YouTube, so I'm not going to dwell on this whole section very long, but I'll go through and try to point out the things that aren't talked about as much. So strap in those seatbelts, folks, and let's get started. So we press start game. Right off the bat, we get this cutscene that looks like it was made for a TV commercial. Actually, I think it actually was used as a commercial. There's not really anything to say about it, other than they probably spent a lot of money on it, so they're gonna use it, goddammit, for both the commercial and the game. And I really like the way this game starts. You get this really trippy dream sequence. Got trippy TV going there. I think it looks really cool. Something that you probably would see in a dream. And I really like this whole scene right here, because it really shows just how traumatized Jill is from the events of the Spencer Mansion, which happened just a few months before this game takes place. Alright, and right there it says September, worst month of my life. You'd think a few months earlier would have been the worst month of her life when she was in the Spencer Mansion and all her friends were getting killed. But,
3 more days.
Okay.
Then I can kiss this town goodbye.
You can walk around the apartment, read some notes and stuff. Turn on the light switch. Nothing really too amazing. Kind of just give you some backstory. Maybe for people who haven't played another Resident Evil game. And here Capcom shows off some of the graphical power of the RE engine and their motion capture skills. And you have to admit, it does look pretty nice. So up to this point, the atmosphere of the game has been pretty good. And then the phone's ringing.
Who could that be? Hello?
Jill, are you okay?
Brad, is that you?
And it's Brad, the helicopter pilot from Resident Evil 1.
You gotta get out of there.
What are you talking about?
I don't have time to explain. You gotta get out of there right now.
All right, let me grab my...
Oh yeah! So, immediately, Nemesis bursts through the door. A very bizarre design choice. Instead of building up tension, they just straight up... Here we go. Here he is. Jill puts her back to the door as if that's gonna do anything. And now the player has control. And now the player has no control. Because we're in a cutscene. Look at all that shit in the hallway, too. What is that? Like, I've never seen an apartment with that much stuff just in the complex's hallway.
What the hell? No way.
And another cutscene. And when people complain about this intro, they're really complaining a lot about the amount of cutscenes. Now the player has control again. And we have... Oh. No. Okay. Whew. I thought it was going to be a cutscene. Alright. We're okay. And then... Oh. No. We have a cutscene. This right here is one of the most bizarre, strangest sequences. Just look how bad it looks. All you can do as the player is hold forward. You can't sprint or anything, but Jill's animation is so slow. It's like the Nemesis is in slow motion. Like, he should be able to easily crush her with that. But it's just like, oh, nope, stop. Oh, here we go. And, oh. It just looks so bad.
This all happened so fast.
So we meet up with Brad,
One fucked up thing
the
always
helicopter
leads to
pilot.
another. It's like Arclay on steroids.
Oh no, Brad, watch out for all those zombies that you're standing right in front of.
In here!
There's so many.
And he's a dumbass.
Don't think about it. We're gonna make a run for it.
Come on, Jill. We know how this ends.
No, I don't.
Are we still a team?
Always.
Wait, what? Still a team?
No! Don't go!
That seems like a strange thing
Don't fuck up like I did. Go!
for Brad to be talking about still a team when he bailed on his team when they needed him the most.
I'm sorry, Brad.
But I guess in a way, him sacrificing himself there is kind of making up for his actions in the first game. Now here's something to keep in mind. Every time between the gameplay, when there's one of these little cutscenes, it's like the designers are using the cutscenes to take away the player agency because they can't have the player doing something that they don't want the player to do, even if it's something simple like not moving forward at the right time. So what you get are a lot of cutscenes that don't really need to be there, but they want to show some sort of scripted event that's cool, that's happening, so they make it a cutscene. Otherwise, the player might do something that they don't want. Here at this little cutscene, Jill has to crawl. The player is using Jill to crawl with the forward button, and then it cuts to that small cutscene because they want to show this scripted event of the zombie's head, all scary, bursting into view. But what if the player stopped crawling forward and started crawling backwards at that exact moment? Well, then the zombie would actually have to react. It would have to do something, right? And they just say, we won't worry about that. We'll just make it a cutscene. Maybe they were that pressed for time, or they thought players wouldn't mind, or it's not that big of a deal, but this goes on like this the whole game. And it just seems lazy. So the player arrives on the roof and is greeted with an action-packed cutscene. And this shit is so ridiculous. Jill calls Nemesis a bitch, decides to get in a car while on the roof of a building. The car happens to have its key in it. This shit was really starting to remind me of another piece of Resident Evil media. I'm not talking about Resident Evil 5 or 6.
Come on. Start, damn it. It's my turn, bitch.
Confirm at 2:18 and 27 seconds. The Nemesis program is now fully activated.
Jill's then saved by Carlos' fiery explosion.
Who the fuck are you?
So you could see from some of those cutscenes in the introduction just how stupid a lot of the cutscenes really are. And there's many more stupid cutscenes throughout this whole game, and I'll go through those later on in the video. But now, I'm going to talk about and show you some different gameplay scenarios, and how they fail on a fundamental level that's really anti-Resident Evil. And we're also going to look at the lack of attention to detail in this game, because throughout the entire game, there's just little small things that isolated, they're not that bad, but when they add up very quickly, and it's not long before you notice them and you're instantly taken out of the game. Your immersion's just broken. Alright, so here we go. You come out into the city and there's these 3 zombies up along the fence, and they're clawing at it because they're dumb zombies, and the fence looks like it could break. And sure enough, a cutscene plays where the zombies break down the fence. And after they break down the fence, you get this awesome, innovative, new gameplay mechanic of exploding red barrel. But here's something. You walk by these zombies, right? So what if the player decides to kill them before triggering the cutscene? Because you most likely know the zombies are going to bust through. So why not just take them out now, right? And you can shoot them till their heads explode. You can really make sure they're dead. But here, you can see the zombies are pretty dead. Then I go back. There's no zombies up along the fence here. You can see there's nothing. There's one of the zombies laying down dead still. The cutscene triggers, and within a nanosecond instantly you got zombies that are already halfway up the fence. And it's like, yes, it's a small detail. You could chalk it up to, well, they're zombies, and they, in that small second, came back to life and started crawling the fence. Even though you can pop their heads, and their heads will miraculously be back. But it can be overlooked, but you get little things like that throughout the entire game. And all those little things add up. And that's one of those things where that's why it was a cutscene in the first place. That's why they couldn't have the zombies bust down the fence in real time, because what if the player killed them before that? Then the player would have no way to get past the fence. And it's like, surely they had play testers and they thought about this and they just said, fuck it. We'll just make it a cutscene. And it's just really shitty. This next section of the game I thought was really cool. Had the potential to be great. You need to go flip 4 switches to get the power back on, but this whole area is covered in some sort of fleshy biomass. And you go to investigate, and you get this poor guy here who luckily happens to have a lockpick set on him. I don't know how many people just carry around the old lockpick set, but okay. His chest explodes with little baby spiders, which is terrifying.
Oh my god.
And then Jill gets... What happens to her here is probably one of the worst things to happen to any character in any Resident Evil game ever. I mean, this is pretty cool. This is that Resident Evil good. What the kids call the good shit. This thing forces its tendril down her throat and impregnates her with baby spiders. It's a pretty terrifying thought, especially after what happened to that guy in the corner, how his stomach just burst open with countless baby spiders. So leading up to this moment has been pretty good overall. However, what follows next is honestly just bad design. Straight garbage, as some might say. Here's the first issue. The player becomes impregnated with the baby spiders, and the way you cure yourself of this ailment is to eat a green herb, and you will throw up the spiders. That's it. Green herbs are plentiful in this game, so you probably already have one, And there's a note 10 feet away that says the green herbs will cure the spidery ailment. And the note is sitting next to not one, but 2 green herbs. This is the kind of shit where it's really like, how do they expect the player to react to this? Do they expect me to feel like a genius for reading the note and eating a green herb? Like, oh my god, I just found the note and it told me to eat the green herbs and I'm cured. I'm so fucking smart. Imagine if they did this. You get impregnated by the spiders, and to find the cure, you have to go to like a nearby clinic or pharmacy. Probably one that you walked by on your way to get to this area. And there was no note just sitting here directly telling you where to find the cure. Maybe a note somewhere talking about something else, vaguely hinting at where to find the cure. And, you have to use your fucking brain like, oh, I just passed that pharmacy. Maybe they have something that could cure me. And then you have to make your way back to that pharmacy while you're infected. And, then we start entering survival horror territory. And that would just anything would be so much cooler than just eat a green herb. Like they did all that work, all that setup, and the solution is to just eat a green herb. And here's the next biggest issue with this whole scenario. What happens if the player chooses not to eat a green herb? Well, from the audio and the amount of visual effects on the screen, you would think that after a set amount of time, Jill would die in some sort of spidery, horrible death, or die of an infection, or mutate into a spidery creature. I don't know. But actually, nothing happens. You just stay in this state forever. In fact, I believe that the entire game could actually be beat in this state. It would be challenging as Jill's health is very, very low. You can't heal, otherwise you would throw up the spiders. Your movement speed's reduced, and she loses access to the dodge ability. But I think it could be done. I made it all the way back to the subway station before I got tired of it. It was too tedious to keep going. And when I first played this game, back when it released, I noticed this because I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't eat a green herb. And I didn't see any other commentators or reviewers talking about this, so if this has since been discovered and players have tried to beat the game, I'd love to know if it is possible. It's really strange the developers didn't think about this, that what if the player doesn't eat the green herb? Like, why would they leave her in this state? Why not have her expire after a set amount of time? Because it's really immersion breaking and game breaking when you see that, oh, they just forgot or didn't care, didn't think it was important enough. It's the little things like that that really just completely take away from the entire experience. But here's something cool you might not know. If the player dies in this state, a unique cutscene plays where Jill's stomach bursts open with spiders. So, let's say we're a normal person and we eat the green herb and we decide to go on with the game. When you walk in this creepy area, which is really cool looking, you're instantly hit with scary music audio track. But if you go back outside the door, the track just stops. And it's like, okay, this is a safe boundary. Now I'm in the danger. But, and boundaries are okay like that, but not if they're so jarring. Like, it feels like the scary music hits way too hard, way too early. I think if they had let it build up gradually, maybe when you activate the first power switch, have the music really kick in, it would have made this whole section way cooler. So now you reactivate the main power
That
switch,
reset the main power switch.
and you get this cool cutscene of that huge spider sack thing exploding, and you got sparks, flames, and dust, and debris going everywhere. And the player's supposed to exit to the right there, and head back towards the station. But I just blew that shit up. I want to go see what kind of damage I caused, right? Like, maybe there's a secret area that's opened with, I don't know, a weapon upgrade or a unique weapon or something, right? But instead, it's the exact same as before you blew it up. The only thing is the big spider sack that was hanging in the air, that was pulsating, that's gone. But it's just like straight gone. Like, they just right-click deleted the asset. You get no spidery goo from the explosion, no debris. Everything is the exact same. You get the music still playing. You get the spider enemies are still spawning. There's no loot. Like, how cool if they had just put one piece of loot up there, like a weapon upgrade or a ruby or something. That would have made the whole thing pay off. It would have been cool. Instead, nothing. Like, why even let the player come back to the spot? They should have just locked the door. They should have just made the whole thing a cutscene and just had Jill walk out the door. Like, it's just really sad that they don't reward the player for going back to just scope out the area now that it should be different after we witnessed the big spider sack exploding. And another thing I noticed is in the concept art for this section, you get this one really creepy looking piece of concept art. It shows two humans wrapped up in some sort of spider cocoon, and their faces are distorted. Like, that looks like a terrible way to die. Just like the worst. And when you're playing through that section, there's nothing that looks like that hanging up right out in the open. But I'm not always looking up, and I wasn't sure exactly, so I went back to this section to go scope it out and to see if maybe I'd overlooked something. And it turns out there actually are two bodies wrapped up in cocoon-like things. But they're easy to overlook, and there's definitely nothing near as cool as what's in the concept art. And how creepy would it have been if there was just some bodies hanging up, cocooned? You got this guy up here on the scaffolding. Chad, I think his name was. And it's like, yeah, that's pretty disturbing, but it's very hidden. You can miss it very easily. Which a lot of times in horror games, having the horror and the creepy shit hidden in the background where it's not noticeable really, that stuff can be great. And I'm not saying everything in this should have been up front, in your face, but maybe just a little bit more in your face. If they had some humans hanging in cocoons, maybe even have them still alive in the cocoons, like writhing in pain, and they're just suffering, moaning. You could even make them like zombies, and that would have been truly terrifying, and I think really cool, and just add that little bit more to the overall world. And I think a lot of the hype surrounding Resident Evil 3 was that players had just played Resident Evil 2, and they were expecting to get the scenes in the city to look something like this, where you get this hyper-detailed, almost hell-on-earth type scenario.
It's everybody.
There's a lot of things going on. It feels like you're in a city that's gone to hell.
There it is. The station.
But instead of players getting something similar to how the city is in Resident Evil 2, you get a lot of scenes like this, where there's nothing happening, everything looks static, there's nothing interesting going on, there's nothing out in the skyline. It doesn't feel like a city. On my first playthrough of the game, I noticed this in this section, and this issue is all over the game. It's not just this section, but this part is probably the worst offender. In this area right here, all these trash decals and cluttered items on the ground are actually floating above the ground. Look at that brown cloth. It's not touching the ground. Those cans are not touching the ground. That trash in front of the police sign, that's not touching the ground. You can see just how bad and how high up that tape is against the wall there. It's not even close to touching the ground. And it just looks really shitty, like they didn't even care enough to have some quality assurance to just make sure objects aren't floating off the ground like that. Like, what the fuck? Like, this is stuff that shouldn't happen in a linear AAA game. And hopefully you can tell from the video just how bad these objects are floating off the ground. If not, you can go check it out yourself in this part, because it really is pretty bad. And there's so many sections of this game where there's just this lack of attention to detail. And it's just so shitty, and it's little things like this just all the time. Look at that cigarette. It's the biggest cigarette I've ever seen. It's bigger than her foot. And so yeah, maybe delaying this game could have fixed a lot of issues like this. How did this even get put into the game like this in the first place? And here we have, I won't call it a lack of detail, but strange, bizarre detail. You have these bunk beds in the sewer. Why the fuck are there bunk beds there? And we're not talking about bunk beds in a secret Umbrella underground lab. These are bunk beds in the sewer underneath the city. Like, what the fuck? The immersion just breaks the second you look at it. Now look at this downgrade from Resident Evil 2. In Resident Evil 2, you can shoot off zombies' limbs or cut them off with the knife, and with each shot or knife stab, you can see the damage getting more and more until eventually the leg or arm or head or whatever just falls off. It's got these awesome ragdoll physics to everything, and it just works really well. Then in Resident Evil 3, well, you can see for yourself. So everyone knows lickers are blind. And if you're patient enough and quiet enough, you can walk around them or walk by them, because they would patrol around a little bit, roam around and give you an opening. But in this game, here's the first licker encounter. It just spawns, it doesn't move. The second you move, it just immediately starts walking at you. You cannot walk around it, you can't get by it. The game is forcing you to fight it. It's like the licker's AI has been downgraded, because all it does is either walk at you, or it just goes right back to the spot it was waiting in. But I guess Carlos can just punch it in the face, or whatever. And here's the second time we see a liquor.
This asshole again.
Carlos says this asshole again, as if it's the same liquor. And once again, it just stays in the same spot, doesn't climb up a wall, doesn't do anything. If you pull a zombie into there, it will just ignore the zombie, even if the zombie's running around making all sorts of noise. And all it does is walk forward to the player. There's no way around it. You have to fight it. But Carlos can just punch it to death. So, yeah. It's just really shitty. It's really like half-baked. But at this point in the game, nothing feels connected. It doesn't feel like a natural transition between the city to the hospital to the underground lab. And when you play as Carlos at the police station, it is so disconnected from the rest of the story that when it ends, the next section you're playing as Jill and the game has to tell you a few minutes earlier. Like, what the fuck?
Shit, it's locked. You stay on the door. I got this fucker.
So here's something that I've noticed that's been happening in Resident Evil games for a while now. And that is the audio quality of the gunshots is just really, really bad. This is not just isolated to Resident Evil 3, but some of the newer Resident Evil games. But because of the automatic weapons and fast-firing weapons, you can really, really notice it. Listen to how thin and shitty the gunshots are. Like the impact, the sound of the bullet impacting the wall is louder than the gunshot itself. This weapon is the worst offender by far. It just sounds so thin and almost non-existent. And just so you can really hear, I'm going to keep the audio playing, but I'm going to make the video screen black. Listen. Like, that doesn't sound like a gun being shot at all. I think this hospital level has a lot of examples of everything wrong with this game. But let's just look at the Hunter reveal. The setup to the Hunter reveal is pretty good. They get the tension going. The hospital's getting creepy. You find these notes with creepy messages. Then you walk into this bloodbath and it's like, what the fuck? And you can just walk right by it. It doesn't chase you out the door. And yeah, it hit me when I was running by it, but a lot of times it doesn't, and it doesn't do much damage. Even if the hunter did chase you out the door, you're right next to a save room. If you think about it, like if the player really got scared of the hunter and they panicked, wouldn't they try to run through the door that's right 5 feet away from you? And like, maybe that'd be okay if that hunter was not the first one after this huge, big tension-building event, but it's just such a shitty payoff.
Welcome to the office of Dr. Nathaniel Bard. Please state your business clearly into the intercom.
Dr. Bard, are you in there? I'm here to rescue you. Open the door.
No voice match found.
Voice match? What kind of sci-fi bullshit is this? Open sesame.
No voice match found.
This is Nathaniel Bard. Open the door, please.
No voice match found.
Come on, let me in, you piece of shit.
No voice match found.
And after the generic hospital, you move to generic warehouse, where nothing interesting happens. It's extremely forgettable. And then you move to generic science lab. It did have this one section right here, which was nice.
These are tyrants. Jesus. Is this where they're made?
So let's look at all the new additions Resident Evil 3 has compared to Resident Evil 2. We got the exploding barrels. We have this goddamn dodge mechanic that is the most janky working dodge mechanic. And a dodge mechanic, I guess it's not inherently bad, but this one just never works. When it does work, you're supposed to get, I'll call it the perfect dodge, where like time slows down, aiming your weapon will automatically aim it at the enemy. But it doesn't ever work right. And it really is a janky mess. And the whole thing looks ridiculous. Like, it's one thing if you had like a little dash button, but the perfect dodge goes off and Jill rolls out of the way and just the auto aim to the enemy that you want to aim at, which doesn't even work half the time. It just looks like an over-the-top Hollywood action movie. And what about Jill herself? Like, I get that she stars tactical search and rescue shit, but to say a few months after the Spencer Mansion incident, Jill can suddenly dodge zombies with front flips and rolling, and it's just like, no, it doesn't make sense in the timeline. And it's like they have these guys sitting around a table at Capcom going, remember the dodge mechanics from Resident Evil 6? We should bring that back. Let's just shove that in here. Even though everyone hated it, let's just put dodge mechanics back into a Resident Evil game. Like, why the fuck would they ever bring dodge mechanics back? And then half the time the dodging doesn't even work. And the next new addition we have is lockpicking, which works pretty well. The lock takes up a slot in your inventory, so it adds that little bit extra to the inventory management. Unfortunately, in this game, there isn't much inventory management. But it's nice that they remembered that Jill was the master of unlocking.
It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
And if you see a lock that you want to pick, you gotta make sure it's one the developers say you're allowed to pick. Guess the shitty padlock is just too good for the master herself. So let's talk about the new enemies now. First up, we got this asshole. Outside of cutscenes and boss fights, the Nemesis is pretty pathetic overall. I think players were really hoping that he would be more similar to Mr. X, but instead he's like a downgraded version of Mr. X. He's super weak. And while Mr. X was an actual threat, when you encounter Mr. X, you have to somewhat use your brain. You have to be able to think quickly and outmaneuver him, or plan ahead and outplot him to where, okay, trick him, pull him to the other side of the police station or whatever. But the whole time, he's walking around, he's looking for you. So it's always like, in the back of your head, is Mr. X going to show up right now at any second? Because you don't know where he's at. But here, the Nemesis, when you get to an area he can't enter, he just kind of disappears, and then he'll reappear when the player walks to a certain spot, and he just kind of Spider-Man's in the same spot every time. So it's not scary in the sense that Mr. X could show up anytime because he's always looking for you. He feels like a downgraded version from Mr. X. And a lot of that's probably due to the map design doesn't allow for a free roaming type AI. So on a fundamental level, the map design is a failure, causing the Nemesis character to be something that is not what players wanted or expected. It's not as cool as something that was similar in the previous game. He almost never poses as an actual threat outside of boss battles. I'd say overall the Nemesis character was a complete fucking disaster, and it's probably why they didn't call the game Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, which is what the original game was called. So after the small city section in the beginning of the game, which is kind of open, and Nemesis kind of chases you, you get these little scripted events that happen, like this moment. Look how fucking stupid this is. Nemesis rolls up, and then I'm just right here, just to show of how little a threat he poses. Right here, I'm just holding one direction on my controller, just like holding left. Now, I'm not trying to dodge or evade the rockets at all. And this is on standard difficulty. This is not on easy or whatever. I don't know, like, why is this so bad? And his RPG there has enough force to lift up that car, which is expected, but just remember that. Because what happens next is one of the dumbest things I've seen in a Resident Evil game in a long time.
I thought you killed it.
Me too.
Point blank. RPG. Like, what? It just boggles your fucking brain. And I know that Resident Evil isn't always the most realistic series, but that right there is so fucking stupid. Jill might as well have just got shot with a fucking magnum in the forehead and just got up after it like, okay, I'm fine. I mean, point fucking blank RPG that had enough force to lift up a car earlier. And she just gets up like it's nothing. Like, what the fuck? And then this whole sequence. It's really fucking stupid too.
I gotta get out. Quick.
Jill says, I gotta get out quick. But that's not really true. This whole sequence, it's like the developers think the players are really, really stupid or something. Like, is Jill saying that supposed to actually really make me want to get out quick? Because there's no reason to get out quick. No reason at all. Like, why shouldn't I take my sweet ass time? Now, maybe if the Nemesis was actually, like, chasing me with a flamethrower, then I might actually be running. And it's just little things like this just break the immersion. And they are just non-stop. if you want to go for the full action horror, you gotta make the action actually action. Oh. Huh. He just appears there, even though he wasn't there a second ago. Okay. Why is that a cutscene? Now watch this. So the Nemesis is right there, hot on your tail, right? Watch how long it actually takes him to be a threat to the player. Like, do they think players are this bad? Do you know how bad you would have to be for him to actually catch you and kill you? I don't think anybody's this bad. Like, what the fuck? Almost 30 seconds to where he's actually a threat to the player. This is the big scary Nemesis. And that's an intentional design choice to have him be that slow. It's like they thought the players are stupid and they're not going to know what to do or where to go. So they have the Nemesis just be ungodly slow. And it's just so shitty. And then you get the boss fight with him, which is whatever. Once again, they think the players must be stupid, so they have Jill say, maybe I can hit his fuel tank, as if you're not going to notice the giant fuel tank on his back. And that sequence was the last time you see Nemesis outside of a boss fight or cutscene. And while the boss fights are alright and his transformations are pretty cool as the game goes on, he's just such not a threat at all during the game that it's just really a big missed opportunity. So another new enemy addition is the Alpha Parasite. I think this enemy was pretty cool. If the game was more horror focused, I think it would have worked really, really well. And it really reminds me of something you'd see from Resident Evil 4, like the Los Plagas Parasite. And I almost feel like they added this in here just to really kind of link Resident Evil 3 to Resident Evil 4 in a way. And that's probably why there's a lot of more action-oriented gameplay. But overall, I think the enemy is pretty cool. It looks really creepy. Another new added enemy is the Gamma Hunter, or Hunter Gamma, and I think it's pretty cool too. The concept art for the new hunters, if they had looked like those three on the right there, I think that would have been really, really awesome. But they don't actually look anything like that. The next new enemy addition is the Palehead, which is kind of like the Regenerators in Resident Evil 4, I guess. They're really hard to bring down if you can even bring them down. Their walking animation is really scary looking. It's like really twitchy. Once again, if the game was more horror focused, I think this enemy would have worked out really well. But instead, they're just kind of like, whatever. Nothing like amazing. So this video is already getting pretty long, and I haven't even begun to talk about the cutscenes and just how stupid they really are. So I'm going to make that a separate video. It shouldn't take me too long to make, as I already have a lot of the clips and narration recorded and edited. But one thing to keep in mind about this Resident Evil 3 remake is that this same team is the team that's working on the Resident Evil 4 remake. I mean, the Resident Evil 2 team is also working on it, but the fact that these people are even involved at all, it's a little concerning. So who knows what will happen. But we can only hope for the best, and thanks for watching.